Okay. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us today during this third webinar of our Circular Economy Knowledge Hubs series. Today, we're going to tackle the topic of how we can turn knowledge hubs work into circular economy transition facilitators. And in particular, today we will explore how knowledge can be used in the development of circular economy policies and how can it support their implementation. Uh, let's go together through some housekeeping rules before passing the word to colleagues. The webinar will last 1 hour, 30 minutes. It will be in English. Your microphones have been muted, but you're welcome to post in our chat any questions that you might have along the way. Our moderators will pick up your questions and try to respond to them promptly. We will also be sharing with all of you the recording of this webinar immediately after its completion. And we can also bring the conversations forward through email exchanges or through the GGKP Leadership Community Forum. Let's go through the agenda rapidly. There will be an introduction session by our team leader of the Switch Asia Policy Support Component, Dr. Zinaida Fadiva, after which we will roll out the two panels in which we will discuss the key thematics of this webinar, after which we will have several exchanges with our speakers and participants and conclude with the remarks. So without further ado, I will pass the word to our team leader, Dr. Zinaida Fadiva, for the welcome and introduction.
Thank you, Sarah, and greetings, good time of the day, warm welcome, colleagues, particularly to our colleagues from GGKP, who are our partners in this process. We have with us today, and warm welcome to you too, 5 knowledge hubs that are partnering in this technical advisory. You are the teams from Europe, Latin America, ASEAN region, Africa, and Central Asia. It's quite a global undertaking. Warm welcome to you all. And of course, greeting to all people who are with us now, actual and potential knowledge users, policymakers, businesses, consumers. People are still coming on, and those which couldn't join us but signed up to this conversation space today would be receiving the recorded webinar. So don't worry that some of you, or those of you which are listening to us with some delay as a record, warm welcome and welcome to the conversation as well. Switch Asia is supporting sustainable consumption and production and circular economy in the Asia-Pacific region. We are working with different topics of resource efficiency, resource circularity, minimization of waste, and impact of these resource-related actions on the climate change, mitigation and adaptation issues. So we work with major supply chains which are quote unquote guilty of the pollution or climate impact, but which are working very actively with different innovations to introduce circular economy actions. So we work with improving knowledge exchange also and active learning from between the region and within the region and also globally. And this is important opportunity which brings us today together. So the two directional thrust of this technical advisory is, number one, to clarify and to improve the knowledge structures currently in use, knowledge structures of different platforms. And it is done to ensure effective exchange between networks and with which potential, between the networks and potential end users. We have analyzed already by this point current taxonomies of the knowledge hubs, knowledge platforms, and are working towards a common system that would have a potential for AI applications for automated classification and exchange between regional knowledge hubs, regional platforms. And the second goal is, of course, for us to improve communication and networking with knowledge users to make sure that the knowledge contained in the hubs is made for use and landed itself for use in circular economy initiatives, which all of you are currently working or implementing. So today, we are focusing on second part of this two-prong approach. And rather than presentations, we have structured this webinar as a conversation between circular economy experts on one hand and the practitioners. In earlier webinars, we noticed that each of the users call for more data and knowledge, but we differ quite a lot in our requirements. Some people are looking for material flows and data life cycle, data on life cycle. Other experts are looking for practical solutions, or some of us are looking at the places and activities where failures have occurred and analyzing why did it happen. Some of us are looking at the framework conditions for effective deployment of policy instruments, which would lead us to the circular economy. So we would like to take the conversation today forward with two panels. The first panel will look at the knowledge use for development of circular economy policy, and the second one at the knowledge use for the implementation of circular economy policy. Of course, effective policy requires policymaking process and which starts with design and then with an implementation. So the policymaking process connects both directions. And so you need to bear with us for some overlaps that may happen between the two panels. So please do share your thoughts and questions in the chat box, as Sarah has invited us already to do. And GGKP and Switch teams and also fellow participants can add their thoughts. And where possible, we can bring some of those to the panelists, we will do so. But it is really a matter of the time and the dynamics of the conversations. But then again, if somebody is putting an idea which you have an opinion or information on, do not hesitate. So thank you very much with this, and certainly we look forward to the fruitful discussion. And at this point, it is my pleasure to introduce a colleague who will take us forward to the next step, Hannes McNulty, who is leading knowledge management and industry work expert at the GGKP. Hannes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Zenaida, and it's a pleasure to be here today. As mentioned, my name is Hannes McNulty. I'm with the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, and I'll be moderating today's first panel, which is very much focused on talking about how knowledge hubs can play a really, really critical role in bridging the gap between research and policymaking, in making sure that knowledge that is produced on the research side is brought to those in the policymaking arena in a kind of an evidence-based approach to most effectively help one, create the policy, but then obviously also all of the many different types of end users that are impacted or influenced by the policy. Now, I am very lucky to have with me here today four very, very interesting speakers. We have, now I will apologize in advance for any bad pronunciation on my side, so I'll be asking all my speakers to reiterate maybe their name when they actually start to speak. But we have Kagauta Mokokena, who is the co-chair of the African Circular Economy Alliance. We have Dr. Venkatashalam Ambumozi, who's a Senior Research Fellow for Innovation with the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. We have Chloe Pottinger-Glass, who's a research fellow with the Stockholm Environment Institute. And we have Daniel Mazure, who's the head of environment and climate with the UN Global Compact Network in Germany. Now, I do believe with this very interesting panel we'll have quite a nice conversation, and it's going to be very interesting to hear the different insights, because we're going to hear from the research side, the policy side, the knowledge alliance side, and of course the business side as well. And I would just like to remind my dear panelists that the idea, we don't have a huge amount of time, so we'll try to keep all of your interventions on the shorter side, kind of to the 2-3 minutes, so that everybody has a chance to answer a number of different questions, and that we can also get some maybe questions from the audience. And I think to start off with, I would like to pose to all of you a very, very common and typical question, but one that's probably one of the most important ones, which is about the knowledge gaps that you already observe within your domain. Now, you're all coming from different perspectives. You're all going to have different ideas of the knowledge gaps that affects your area of work, but it's the starting point. How can we bridge the gap between research and policy if we don't understand what the knowledge gaps really are? So I'd like to start off and let all of you kind of come with your perspective on this. And maybe if I may, I'd actually like to start with Daniel, because Daniel, you're coming from kind of a business perspective. I'm going to say the end user perspective. So I'd like to jump in with you first on knowledge gaps, and then we'll jump over to the research and policy side. So over to you, Daniel, if you'd like to give us some insights on the knowledge gaps you observe from your area of focus.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I have some internet connections. I hope it just maintained. I just jumped in, so let me start right directly with your question. As a knowledge hub, we're the business platform of the United Nations, right? The Global Compact for Responsible Business. We try to give capacity building material and knowledge material to companies, but also to other players like multi-stakeholder initiatives and NGOs, whatever. What we see as a classical gap is that we have a very narrowed concept of what economic growth is, and for the circular economy you have to take it a little bit broader. So you can't just only produce and get in new materials to create job. What you have to focus on is preserving the value of materials and products, and this must be the focus of circular business and the politics that support it. So we try to actually show how this could be done, and I'm not the creator of this knowledge. We have a lot of more people in this room probably that have better knowledge, but we try to show that the creation of the original product value cannot be the sole focus, that materials and products must be recovered along the value chain, and that we have to, or that we can achieve the lesser dependence on limited raw materials from there, at least in our German perspective. And just to get that a little bit clearer, for example, there was the German Resource Efficiency Program that was running from 1994 to 2020, and it had the aim to increase material productivity, right? And it said that it wanted to double the production in its phase of application. And it wasn't possible. So they raised it quite a lot, I think 75% or more, but the target of 200% was clearly missed. So we really have to look in there and see how we can't only achieve a higher efficiency. We have to really rethink our production capacity and technologies in a whole. And I think this is one of the biggest knowledge gaps there is to really implement policies and where we can actually jump in.
Thank you very much, Daniel. In a way, you've outlined a very important challenge, really, on the kind of business end user level. I mean, there's a knowledge gap in the technicalities of making all of this work. Obviously, behind this, I'm going to move more towards policy now. Policy is needed to direct all of this work, both in providing the capacity building, the knowledge, but also maybe the incentives, etc. So for this, I'd like to actually move to Kagauta, if I may. You come from both, we'll say, you're with the Department of Environment in South Africa, as well as being co-chair of the African Circular Economy Alliance. So I think you have a very strong understanding of the policy, let's say the knowledge required to be able to develop a type of policy that can have an impact then on businesses the way Daniel has outlined. Would you like to give us an idea where you see the major gaps on the policy side of things, the major knowledge gaps that we still need to address to be able to get the right kind of policy in place?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to the colleagues. Quite an honor and privilege to be part of these discussions. Very important in terms of the role of policy and research in circular economy, largely because these are part of the building blocks for getting circular economy in place. And also the significance of the two is that for policy to be evidence-based, you need to have an indication in terms of research that informs that type of policy. And obviously with the research, there comes science that also informs policy. And the advantages of this is that with the science involved, you're then able to understand the science of materials as well as resource efficiency better. And then you are able to have a discussion on circularity even much more easier based on this. So the gaps will normally be where you don't have a policy or a roadmap. So hence from there, we have worked on assisting different countries in coming up with these roadmaps as well as action plans, as it is the case in South Africa. So you have an opportunity with policy involved in driving circular economy through either roadmaps or the action plans that get developed. And these obviously will then talk to the government priority or the politics that my fellow panelists was talking about, to say that's how the administrations are run. There will be priorities in terms of jobs, there will be priorities in terms of the economy, economic growth, and priorities in terms of environment. The materials in the environment space will be key in terms of diverting materials or resources away from going to landfill because of the opportunity to reuse these materials as an input to make other products. There you find the closing the loop in terms of circularity, the material that will be an output or a waste in another process becoming an input material or a resource into the next process, in a process we call in an industrial hub, an industrial symbiosis program, when one factory's waste becomes an input material and a resource for the next door factory to manufacture other process. And in that way, you find the closing the loop, you find circularity, and you find the efficiency as well as the link between policy as well as research. And for the policy to be research-based, to be evidence-based, and to be science-based. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And literally with your last sentence, you're allowing me to move very smoothly over to our research colleagues, because you've mentioned some important points there. And one of the things that I take from here is you've used two types, you've used two terms, roadmaps and action plans. And of course, one of the things that's very important about any type of circular economy roadmap or action plan is that it's adapted to a specific region, and more importantly, a country, because every country has a different situation. Every country needs a roadmap that is adapted to them, to their way, their culture, their way of working, their economic situation, their way, their focus on business, etc. Obviously, it has to be very particular. And I think this is leads us very nicely to the research side of things, and how research and what research produces, how that can be shaped into something that is very country specific. And I think maybe I could move first to Anbu. You're coming from an ASEAN, East Asia perspective. Maybe you could give us some insights into what you have observed as knowledge gaps in the area of research that is required to be able to help countries develop these country-specific roadmaps, action plans on circular economy. Now, I think you have quite a regional experience, but maybe if you could give us this perspective, it would be really much appreciated.
Yeah, sure, Hans, and thank you very much for having in this panel. I'm here representing a region about the Southeast Asia, 10 small and medium-sized economies. And through the research, and we helped the ASEAN to develop their circular economy framework. And this is a kind of a blueprint for accelerating the transition. And when developing this framework is developed based on our research, and when we are linking this research to the policy, and it is a complex field, and there are a lot of potholes. There is a knowledge gaps exist, and maybe I can point out what difficulties we face, and we are still continue to face. And one thing, particularly from the developing and the emerging economies perspectives, and the first thing when we think about when we say the circular economy or the sustainable consumption and production, and here the first thing for the research or the policy making, we need a data, and the data that is in a very standardized form, and the data that is that could be in a form that is useful. And this is where most of the struggle comes in, or the knowledge gap exists, where there's a lack of consistent and reliable data on the material flows, or the waste streams, and then environmental impact, particularly this waste management, resource efficiency, impact on the economic activities. So this is the first basic challenge, or the gap that is we identify, and the second thing is the concept and the practice of the circular economy is looks good and beautiful, and but it is a complex. It is a subsystem system of systems. So the next gap that comes is how we can comprehend this system of systems, and I think here most of our struggling and to identify the opportunities along the value chain, and here we need to analyze the material flows and identify the key sectors in this value chain. We are not simply focusing on one particular hotspot, and it is a entire value chain, and that also need business models, and that value chain approach, I think my colleague previously mentioned about it from the business perspective. And the third thing, when we say this is a research, and we need to transfer this research into the policy makers, and here there is a I think Makoda mentioned about the roadmap, but the only thing is, if you look into this, is the market for the circular product and the technologies that support the circular economy as sustainable, it is a very dynamic. On the other hand, the policies are relatively kind of fixed thing, and here I find the policy gap is, and how this adaptive policy framework could evolve, taking into consideration this dynamisms of these evolving technologies. This is my third point, and the fourth point that is very specific to ASEAN. It is like EU, and which is looking for a single market. And here we find the challenge is this harmonization of the standards and related to the waste management and the product standards and the trade in the secondary materials. And here we don't have, each country has its own, and when we are thinking about one single market, this need to be harmonized, where most of the struggle lies in and the gaps exist. I stop here and thank you.
Thank you very much. You've raised some very, very interesting points. And one of the things I picked out here, two things that popped to my head is the issue with data and the inconsistency between data that's out there, and also the complexity of circular economy. We make it sound so easy. We make it sound like, here's a roadmap for a country, implemented. And as you rightly said, it's a system of systems. It's a very, very complex approach that requires so many different moving parts. And I think when we think down to how to convert this information into policy that then directly supports the businesses, we're dealing with a very, very complicated and, as you said, evolving situation, which I think is, we need to be careful not to underestimate how difficult it is to make the circular economy work effectively and the challenges we have there. So very good points on the knowledge gaps there. And I think that would bring me very nicely to Chloe. Chloe, I think, again, we're hitting on the research side, but I don't know if you want to build upon some of the points that Anbu mentioned, or if you have additional ones you want to bring in, because I think we're really hitting on some fundamental issues here, which be nice to hear from you as well.
Yes, absolutely. And well, actually, my intervention will be also focusing on the ASEAN region and from the policy perspective, but I think I can nicely build on what Anbu has already shared. So just a little bit of background. I'm representing Stockholm Environment Institute, which is a global research to policy organization. And we're currently focusing on how can we transition to a regional circular economy in ASEAN. So really looking at this framework, which Anbu talked about, for harmonizing circular economy policy in ASEAN. And so what we've been seeing is that aspects of circular economy that are quite strong already in the region are mainly around EPR, extended producer responsibility, for things like packaging, single-use plastics, electronic goods, with countries such as the Philippines and Vietnam really at the forefront here. We also see some policy trends around green public procurement, with countries starting to bring some of these schemes in place. And we can also look at the framework itself to see what the strategic priorities that were highlighted. So this included things like innovation and digitalization, economic and financial mechanisms, and also what Anbu talked about, which was this standards harmonization, which is really key for things like solid waste. So I think this already quite clearly shows the regional needs. So in terms of the gaps, I'd like to discuss three things. So firstly, we have all these great policies in place. How do we move from these policies, which are well designed, into actual implementation? So I'm very happy to be part of this panel, which is bringing these two aspects together, because I think this is a really key area that needs to be better strengthened. So in terms of specific gaps, we found that current national policies lack adequate stakeholder engagement. By this, we mean to essential partners such as the private sector, subnational governments, and civil society. There's also a lack of clear delegation of institutional responsibilities. Who does what? How is the budget allocated? How can we move towards more formal commitments? So this policy harmonization that we see from the ASEAN framework is a really exciting step forward. But the existence of the policy doesn't really translate necessarily into implementation on the ground. So for the second gap, whilst we see a lot of emphasis on waste management and EPR, as Daniel pointed out in the beginning, we do really see this gap in terms of consumption and production patterns. So actually reducing waste at its source, this more holistic perspective, which incorporates societal shifts, which is of course very hard to tackle. So for instance, we're seeing very little evidence of things like right to repair schemes, which I think would be an interesting pathway forward in the ASEAN region. So, you know, alongside that, how can we actually look towards things like educational and public information interventions that can really transform attitudes and practices to consumption from the bottom up? So this really needs to go alongside these policy interventions for it to work. And just briefly, I'll give one final gap. So I think a key issue that isn't being focused on enough is around social equity and justice within the transition to circular economies. So which groups will actually be most impacted? So at Stockholm Environment Institute, we do a lot of work with informal waste workers who are really forming the backbone of recycling efforts in many cities across ASEAN. But they're sidelined. These jobs are very often poorly paid, hazardous, workers face stigma. So how can we link circular economy goals to just transition goals? How can we focus on things like good green jobs as part of the circular economy and actually look to embed this within broader policies and plans? So I think this should be another priority for the region. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Chloe. I'm really enjoying all of your inputs. You're all coming out with extremely important points, and your point here, this need to move from policy to implementation. I mean, we have a great starting point. We have great ideas. We have great roadmaps, etc. How do we actually move to implementation? And what I'd like to do is maybe to go quickly back to Kagauta, if I may, because again, coming from the Department of Environment in South Africa, could I ask you if you have a kind of a good example where you have an evidence-based circular policy which has been developed on the basis of good research and has supported implementation on the ground. So this conversion from just a roadmap into something that is supporting implementation. Do you have a good example from this that you could give us? And again, I just ask if you can just answer 1 or 2 minutes, because I'd like to get to the others as well, but it'd be great to hear from you.
Certainly, and thanks a lot for the question. As indicated, I'm Gauta Mokoena, Chief Director, Chemicals and Waste Policy Specialist Monitoring Services at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment in South Africa. So we are responsible for national policy and legislation, and hence the example that one can look at is that in terms of our National Environmental Management Waste Act, we have the requirement for the development of the National Waste Management Strategy, which is a policy for waste management. So in that development of the National Waste Management Strategy for South Africa, we have built in the principle of circular economy in 2020 for the first time, in addition to the traditional waste hierarchy as well as the polluter-based principle. In doing so, we enabled the work on circular economy implementation to take place based on the policy that is informed by the data and the evidence that we spoke about earlier on. To say, in our case, we use the state of waste report of 2018, which gave us an indication in terms of which waste streams and how much in the different waste streams is there as an opportunity for prioritization, because our Waste Act also allows minister to prioritize certain waste streams for development of extended producer responsibility schemes as one of the measures that can be put in place. So we see EPR implementation as part of our circular economy initiatives. Hence, in taking forward the National Waste Management Strategy to implementation of EPRs in the 6 EPR schemes or priority waste streams, which are paper and packaging, lighting, electronic waste, pesticides, lubricant oils, as well as portable batteries. Those 6 are priority waste streams which we have identified in line with the 5 big bets that are also identified at the African Circular Economy Alliance level, where we have identified the 5 key and waste streams that has potential, such as the built environment, packaging, electronics, fashion and textiles, as well as food systems. And linked to this is the policy guidance at regional level, the Continental Circular Economy Action Plan, which further enables us at sub-regional level to work together in sharing these experiences as well as best practices among ourselves at sub-region level. So a lot of work involving our other neighboring countries in as far as sharing these experiences either on EPR, on circular economy, and on a number of other best practice examples. So as we speak, we are hosting another delegation who's also here on a mission on EPR as well as waste management examples. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Some very nice examples of actually the implementation side of things. So thank you for that. What I'll do is, I know we're already running we've only a few minutes left on our panel. What I'd like to do is actually jump back to Daniel, in fact, if I may, because we've done the whole loop of starting off with you describing the kind of the business needs at the starting point, going right over to the research and back again. Now we talked about the implementation. But one of the things that would be interesting to see is this issue that we have of working on a very global or regional level and really managing to adapt the experiences, the information down to a local level. And it would be interesting to see if you have any experience of this within kind of you're part of a UN entity, you have the global perspective, yet you work also on a country level. Do you have experience already or an example you can show where you've managed to take this kind of bigger picture experience or expertise down to a more local level to be really of benefit to businesses?
Yes, sure, Hannes. So first of all, you say it correctly, right? We're a global entity, UN Global Compact, but also we're the German network. So our main task is already taking this global agenda or the 10 principles that we work on and breaking it down to our local context. And the same is needed in the circular economy discussion as a whole. And I mean, it's already been said by Dr. Ambu, by Chloe, also by Mr. Mokena, that when we look at this big picture circular economy, there's cultural and social context that must be looked at, market demand, consumer behavior, technological capabilities and innovation of each economy at what they can do. And what we do now, if you look into the German perspective and into European context, and our specific role as a business platform of the United Nations is really break circular economy, the system of systems, down to business needs, right? Look into where can businesses really make money. So give the business case, talk the language of the businesses to really make sure this is something that's worth going for, right? It's not, I mean, it's very much complicated if you look at the whole picture, but break it down, make it easier, and use it in your specific context where you work. So obviously, regional, but also case specific. As the German network, we work together with WWF Germany in the publication of a circular economy guidebook for businesses. So really giving them hands-on tools, how they can work, right? Really looking into how is a material analysis, how do you give the best material streams, how do you evaluate them to really have an impact-orientated workflows, and at the end integrate it into your business case. That on one side. And on the other side, maybe something that Chloe actually pointed out, and it's very, very important, that if you do a policy, if you work on this as a broker, as a knowledge hub on a circular economy, really try to involve as much stakeholders as there are, and focus on what you can do in your social context. So obviously, we in Germany have a different position if we look into innovations and industrial symbiosis, as I say, this cross-cutting industrial and product flows that we can work on, while in other regions, ASEAN has just mentioned, or South Africa, will have to focus on informal waste collectors and how to get this the social concept better in. And then we as knowledge hubs should really take it in, and try to work with the different agencies and really try to figure out which is the best way to actually applicate it. So there's a lot of way to actually regionalize it, and I think it's very interesting for the Stockholm Environment Institute, because you have one point in Scandinavia where they probably embrace a lot of the sustainability issues, and on the other side, working in ASEAN with a lot of economies that have huge social issues and challenges, and where obviously the application is very, very much different.
No, this is very nice, Daniel. And I think we received a question from the audience asking pretty much this: how can knowledge hubs balance global circular economy principles with local realities, ensuring that knowledge sharing is relevant and adaptable to diverse cultural, economic, and regulatory environments? It's a nice summary of what needs to be done. I think you've described it there well. You've kind of more or less answered this question in a way, what you've just said there, but I think it's a very important point, because there is a huge balance. I mean, I come back to what was said before about the complexity of circular economy, the systems of systems, and then bringing that down to really a local context. It is very, very difficult. But I think it would be nice, actually, maybe I can go back to, I mentioned system of systems, and maybe I can go back to Anbu about this, is do you, from your side, I mean, you've spoken a lot about the knowledge gaps, but maybe I can also ask you about some good practice examples of where the work you've been doing or research has led really to evidence-based circular economy policy development. I mean, what the good examples of what has come out of this. I mean, have we managed in the ASEAN region really to deliver something that addresses these gaps yet, or are we still only partially there? And if you have a couple of examples we can go into in depth on. You're still on mute, Andy.
Thank you. And here, here we are, I think Chole mentioned about it, and we are talking about the transition. And when we are saying about the transition, to see that implementation happen, we needed three things. One is the knowledge, second is the technology, and third one is the finance. The challenge here is to transition to be completed, or the transformation to happen. All these three need to be happen together, and this is where most of the challenges comes. And that is where the knowledge hubs can help us and to become a kind of a facilitator or accelerator of the transition. In this thing, and I can say about one example is there is the Regional Knowledge Center for the Marine Plastic Debris that has been established within the area under the ASEAN +3 framework. I think this is it was established in 2019 and under the ASEAN Plus framework conditions, and it focuses on all these three aspects. And one is the focusing on bringing collecting the data and putting it into usable form. And the second thing is collecting the best practices, evolving within the region and outside the region. Third one also, it is changing the mindset of the policymakers. These three things are needed, and knowing that there are several initiatives, and there is one initiative about the 3R knowledge hub that has been established in 2000, later 2000, in under the patronage of ADB. And this knowledge hubs exist, they grow, and basically they also have a kind of a natural death or slow down when the external funding gets stopped. And that's why this knowledge center for the marine plastic debris, and though it was initially started from this ASEAN +3 fund framework, now it was kind of emerging as an organic growth, and where there is the ownership is getting by that local governments and also private sector, they are coming in. And so there is the financial sustainability, and also there is a continuity and the consistency. to support to the transition. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. One of the things is definitely also I'll join up 2 points you made before. One is the complexity of the circular economy, and then changing the mindset of policymakers. It's obviously hard. I mean, obviously, when we're dealing with something so complex, it's not just changing their mindset; it's also teaching them, I think, as well, to understand what this is about, and they're from that actually being able to change their mindset or approaches, because it is a challenge for sure. Chloe, I'd like to actually come back to you then, if I may, because you made, when you were answering previously, you made a very important point of, we shouldn't just be talking about waste management, we should be also addressing it at source, particularly in the consumption production area. Now, I wonder if you have any particular good examples as well of where this has been achieved, or where you've observed a success in this area. You have something that you could entice us with from that perspective to give us hope.
Thank you. I'm hoping this one will come up later in the discussion, but actually I have an example that I'd really like to share that responds to the question that was raised in the chat, which I think is such a fantastic way of putting it. How do we square these global principles with local realities? And linking back to the points I raised earlier about these gaps, specifically the need for these broader societal shifts and focusing on social justice and equity. So this is more of an example of a methodology that we applied a few years ago. So together with our partner, which was UNIS Thailand, we implemented a series of events which actually brought together youth activists and informal waste workers. And so we wanted them to come together and discuss the challenges that they saw and the potential pathways forward towards what we called an inclusive circular economy. So addressing these specific social challenges, which, as Daniel rightly pointed out, are going to be very, very varied across different regions and countries. So we had over 150 young people together with civil society partners and private sector groups from across the ASEAN region. And we did what we called policy boot camps. So leading them through this whole ideation process. And then young people were able to present these at a virtual high-level side event at the 77th UN General Assembly. So really giving them a kind of global platform and allowing them to think about how can we move towards this broader shift to support the circular economy. And then jointly, one of our partners, which was Indorama Ventures, so this is one of the world's largest PET plastic recycling companies. As a result of these workshops that we hosted, they decided to pilot approaches for inclusion of informal workers into their recycling value chains. So I think we had two very strong outcomes from this methodology. And the strengths of this came from building solidarity between different stakeholders and amplifying the voices of marginalized groups within the circular economy. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
No, a very nice way to actually to bring this panel to a close. I think it's a very nice example, because this is obviously our challenge, is always bringing this into reality. And I think many of all the speakers have spoken about this challenge overall. It's turning circular economy into something real on the ground is a consistent challenge. So I'd like to thank you all very, very much for your very, very interesting insights. I think you've given us a very nice segue into the next panel, which is being moderated by Renee. I think ultimately we're also seeing the very important role that knowledge hubs have in coordinating, one, the understanding of the different knowledge gaps that are out there and how to fill these gaps through all the different sources and funnel them down so that the different types of knowledge users can access the knowledge most relevant to them, but also knowledge producers understand what gaps need to be filled to meet those specific needs. So I think the role of knowledge hubs is definitely very, very important in doing a lot of assessment, translation, and ensuring accessibility to the right type of knowledge. But with that, let me please hand over to Renee for panel number 2, and to once again thank my panelists for really a very, very interesting and insightful conversation. Thank you very much. Over to you, Renee.
Thank you, Hannes, and thank you also to the panelists for interesting discussion. And I would also like to draw attention to the fact that there have been a number of questions coming through the chat and the Q&A, which we have tried to respond to already, but keep those coming. I think one of them was really around these R strategies and the sort of preference for recycling, and I think that's not necessarily needed. It's really reuse and refurbishment, remanufacturing that would be preferred a priority, but certainly one needs to look at the specific solutions in specific situations. So there's no one size fits all of what's always better. So I will be joined by the panel of 5 speakers, and I will try to give them all a little bit of a chance to speak on the policy implementation. So I have with me Tim Forslund, Senior Lead for Citra International and the EU Circular Economy Resource Center, Philippe Camano Garcia, Manager and Lead Global Circular and Lead for the Global Circularity Protocol for Business at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I'm also here Thomas, co-convener of the ASEAN Circular Economy Business Alliance. Andres is joining us from Colombia, I think. Good morning to you, Finance and Service Managers at Sempre Colombia, which he will explain is dealing with recycling organizations, recycling businesses. And then last but not least, Martin Calisto Fiant is joining us from the Netherlands, I think, and he's lead for the global value chains at the Circular Economy Foundation. So this segment, we are trying to basically address 3 points. One is a bit of what are successes, what could we showcase as good examples of where knowledge has been applied or in the practical implementation. And the second one will be more on how the knowledge hubs can deal with communication and outreach with the different stakeholders. And the third one, maybe also looking at the knowledge in the hubs as a collector and curator for knowledge. So I would like to start with the question on maybe some good examples of initiatives where knowledge has been contributing to this. So maybe I'll start with Philippe, and then I will go also to Thomas and Tim to speak on this first one. So Philippe, you're leading the Global Circularity Protocol. So maybe give us a 30-second blurb on what it is and how you see that as a mechanism, as a good practice example of putting circular economy into action in the business sector.
Thank you very much, René, for the kind introduction, and also thank to Sweet Sage and Green Growth Knowledge Partnership for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. So very quickly, the Global Circularity Protocol actually tries to address exactly one of the problems identified by one of the previous speakers, Dr. Ambutsi, that you basically said the 3 pillars of circular economy are knowledge, policy, and finance. So the protocol comes in where actually to do that, you need the right language, you need the right circular performance methodologies so that businesses can start comparing with each other, and also financial markets can start comparing circular performance between company A with company B. And that really goes, starts answering the problem that we have at the moment circularity, which is the lack of interoperability and the lack of comparability. So the Global Circularity Protocol, just very briefly, it's an initiative led by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, together with One Planet Network hosted by United Nations Environment Program, together with over 80 partners. So over 50 companies, as well as different organizations such as ISO, Greenhouse Gas Protocol that was co-led by the World Business Council, as well as a number of development banks. Many of you also are partners here in this call, like Africa Circular Economy Alliance and so many others. So I very much welcome this discussion. I always get very excited as a circular practitioner of these discussions. Where does the protocol come in, and how does that link with knowledge hubs? Well, currently we're basically creating that a knowledge gap, which is how do you measure circularity? How do you put the governance around that? How do you bring, as Chloe very critically mentioned, how do you link that with social impact, social metrics, which quite frankly is one of the key gaps in circularity? How do you bring informal workers into the discussion? So in that sense, very happy to say and very honored that we have, for example, Viego in our advisory committee from the Women's Informal Workers' Rights. So, you know, these are the kind of elements we're trying to bring to a multi-stakeholder, multi-interest sort of exercise. Very ambitious. So that's why we need all of you on board. But yeah, happy to tell you more also before Renee tells me I'm out of time. Apologies for that.
No, Philip, that's very good, and we know that you're on an ambitious task because it's complicated. People say greenhouse gas monitoring is already complicated, and now we try to not only manage the CO2 but everything. So it gets just complicated, but it's good that ultimately what gets measured gets honored, gets managed in a proper way. So that's really good. So let me go to Thomas and ask him to maybe share some examples of where good practices have been documented into knowledge and be used also as inspiration or as an enabler for other companies. Thomas.
Good evening from Southeast Asia. Wishing everybody good morning, good afternoon, and also good evening. I represent the organization, the ASEAN Circular Economy Business Alliance, which is an initiative funded through Switch Asia. And we work with the ASEAN Business Advisory Council and AREBA is our regional hub. We have done about more than 80 cases of things, of which 78 has been published in the websites, both Switch Asia and in our ASEBA. These 78 cases are quite diverse, but it is the result of consultations with businesses. And what we had focused in this whole case studies is on innovations and business responsibility. Businesses have a responsibility for the impact they have on the environment and people. And these are all from the Southeast Asian ASEAN business cases. What we use these business cases is to help people operationalize their circular economy journey and what motivates them to do it as well. So from our own 10 case, there's 80 plus case studies, we found that what motivates people is number one, you save money. There's cost savings. Number two, there are business opportunities that comes out from it. And number three, the people are preparing it for the future. And the other one, the fear one is everybody is doing it, therefore I must also do it. If I don't do it, I might miss out something. So they're just doing it because it's the trend. So I think this is the key lessons. In essence, I would say those things. But I also want to say the approach we take is to uncover cases really that's happening in Southeast Asia and document it. So it is to showcase and facilitate good business practices, innovative solutions.
Okay, thank you, Thomas, for highlighting this. And in the chat, we put the links to these business cases. It's really aimed as an inspiration for business. I'd like to take the conversation to you, Tim, because you're just in the design phase or operationalization phase for the European Circular Economy Resource Center, isn't it? If I have the abbreviation right. So you've looked at other platforms and initiatives. So what do you take as lessons learned, which you can implement in this new initiative, which you might maybe also introduce in brief? Tim.
Well, thank you, Renee, and thank you also to Switch Asia and GGKP for the invitation. It's really always a pleasure to talk about a topic that I love. And I think if I could answer the question from the perspective of, previously with Hannes McNulty and Kagauta Mokoena, the discussion about roadmaps, because I think that's been formative for our understanding of what knowledge is, what it means. And I would like to sort of walk through how this can start from a roadmap perspective to the background work that's done, to the policy design, and ultimately the operationalization, which to us, from a Finnish perspective at least, has been really both about businesses and policymakers. And I think if we think about, for instance, with with businesses here, and the different cases. I'm just thinking of to continue from Thomas. When we think about knowledge resources, it can mean so many different things. But I would like to highlight not just the content, but also the importance of the context and especially the process from our experience. But just to see a few things about the content, I think with business cases, this is something that we have really worked on a lot ourselves. So for almost every year, in relation with the World Circular Economy Forum, which is led by Citra, we have developed business cases for circular economy business models. So trying to think about different areas where we had the forum and different topics that we can integrate in these case lists. But we've also had, so nodding here to Daniel Meseré and the mentions of providing hands-on guidance, that we have provided guidebooks or playbooks, as we call them, for different sectors. So we have quite many different resources on our website at Citra that you can see. And this is similar also to, I think, to the circular economy, the EU circular economy stakeholder platform. So having access to these resources. But I would also like to broaden the understanding of when we think about what knowledge means, and also to point about our plans with the EU Circular Economy Resource Center that has been set up, as you mentioned, Renee. And here we also want to provide access to experts that can help EU partner countries with circular economy requests, be it in policy or business related. So to provide both the kind of expert advice as well as the institutional connections. So I think this is something, when we think about knowledge hubs and resources, it's not necessarily just a product, it's not just a report or something, but these kind of loose networks are, I think, quite important to keep in mind as well. But then I wanted to really highlight the process, and here I think all the networks that have been formed in Finland as part of the roadmap process that started in 2016 is really, really important. That if you don't have the processes that back this up, it's more difficult, I think, to provide something that ultimately ends up with operationalization of the knowledge resources. So what the Finnish roadmap process did, and now it's been continued also with concrete resource-specific targets that were set in 2021, that set specific resource targets and has a strategy for that, but I can comment on that next. But just to explain what the roadmap process was, it basically brought together about 1,000 people in Finland. So having the policymakers brought on board, having companies, citizens and universities of applied sciences working closely together to co-create not just a vision of what a circular economy is, but also very concrete tools for what needs to be done by when and who bears the responsibility for that. So just two examples that come to mind is the Innovation Enhancing Public Procurement Center, KEINO, that was set up. So the idea is really to think about what are the experts that we have in Finland and how can we activate them with circular economy tools rather than having some very centralized circular economy network, to think about who are the experts out there that we already have and how can we train them just a little bit to learn the basics of circular economy. So that has been really, really essential. And another example here is the development of circular economy indicators, where we have worked with the Statistics Finland, so the National Statistics Agency. So this has been, I think the roadmap here has been really quite pivotal for our understanding of what it is. And Citra led the work with this back in 2016. So I think the importance here of having a party that's perceived as neutral is a plus, so that it's a new government comes, the work can continue. And thus far, there has been quite broad buy-in with circular economy. It hasn't been as politicized as some other topics. So I think that you have this co-creation process, you have a neutral party, and you have a clear goals, and so it doesn't just become words on paper. And then, of course, with a strategic program where we have these targets and the operationalization, I could come back to that next, but this is a bit of the context. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. I think two topics which I want to maybe reiterate in slightly different words. You explained on the roadmap process for Finland, and it was a quite involved process to look at critical innovation opportunities. But we see also roadmap being interpreted in quite different ways. So if we were talking about roadmaps, circular economy roadmaps, which we see for some of the countries in the global south, it's basically just a number of actions on there. So this really shows that circular economy and also the terms around it mean very different things to very different people. So that is that is one. But the second thought which you mentioned is that it's not only about the knowledge, but it's also about the people who can translate this and who can connect this. And that brings me basically to the second part of the conversation, which I want to highlight. So we have the knowledge hubs where knowledge is there, but knowledge is useless until it's brought to some use, isn't it? So until it's applied. So I wanted to maybe bring first Andres in from Colombia to elaborate a bit on how your network is working to ensure that the knowledge which is available about good recycling practices is really being adopted and being utilized. So Andres, can you come in on this?
Sure, Rene. Hello, everybody. Any parts of the world you're in. It's a pleasure. Andres from here, located in Colombia. So first, very quickly, SEMPRE is an NGO, right? And basically, we just articulate any kind of efforts between different kind of sectors, public, private, basically trying to transfer any kind of initiatives within the circular economy world to impact all the players, all stakeholders within this circular economy cycle, right? Talking from the recycler's perspective up to the companies themselves. We've been doing this for 15 years. And in the beginning, we started probably more within this ERP framework, but we have evolved to this new world of opportunities through the plastic packs and everything that is leading through an evolution. From that starting point, and I'd like to start first, or let me mention 3 key aspects trying to address the main question. So first is understanding what the role of the knowledge hubs is, right? And I'm talking basically because we work along with mainly private institutions, our companies, right? So that's our first starting point. What is our role? Since we're not an academic-based institution, however, we work with them all the time. Secondly, and probably the key argument here for me is we have become a technical reference, right? Let's say that we have this neutral standpoint, since we're not a company, we're not any kind of academic institution, but through our experience, we have become a technical reference that give us the opportunity to talk to these entities that in the end, they end up impacting all the policy-making processes. Once we have done that and trying to address how do we take our knowledge into practice, or how do we impact the policy-making process, we found that becoming this technical reference through, of course, through experience plus research, we have realized that we can talk to those technical committees or technical commissions that in the end, they become the reference to those policymakers. So once we have collected and we have supported all of information, we start talking with, at first, with private sector committees, and then we're able to take this as a group, to take this to the National Innovation System Commissions. At that point, that data and that knowledge is used forward to produce, let's say, laws, projects, initiatives, and so on and so on. So that would be my key point, Rene.
Yes. Okay, Andres, that's really interesting that you say that how you have been able to garnish best practices and basically advance that into the system to become standards and basically the practice-based standards in the legislation and policies and standards. So that's a really good example. I would like to move on to Martin. Sorry to bring you in last, but less best. So Martin, what is your sort of take on how this knowledge, which is contained in knowledge platforms is in different websites, is being utilized, and what could be done better on that? And you yourself are also a foundation trying to work on circular economy. So how do you approach this? What's your view on this?
Well, thank you for giving me the space to speak today. It's a real honor to be part of this really exciting panel. And well, from my experience in knowledge hubs and from the knowledge hubs that we are part of at Circular Economy and particularly Horizon 2020 projects that I've worked in. I just wanted to highlight some of the key elements that I think are needed for a knowledge hub to be effective. And essentially what I've seen that is really important, and I think some of the other panelists have highlighted, is first of all, ensuring the diversity of actors present in the knowledge hubs. Very often it's usual suspects who end up in these hubs, which obviously limits the broad range of knowledge and information that these hubs end up working with. And obviously, often it's the people with most access to power that end up in these places, and most vulnerable actors, especially workers, miners, farmers in the global south, are very often ending up being voiceless in these places. And so I think it's really important to figure out ways to build engagement and participation for the most vulnerable people that often are the ones that are most concerned with the talks that are being done. They're the ones for which we want to build a safer, a more sustainable planet, and for which we want to share our resources better, and for which we want to clean rivers and improve our ecosystems. So at the end, I think it's important to make sure that we can include them, that we can engage with civil society in a better way. So that's the first point I wanted to bring to the table, and to really challenge us on how we do this throughout these knowledge hubs. The second one is the fact that very often knowledge hubs, while full of really good intentions and a lot of really exciting research being created out of it, fail to really connect with decision makers and government officials at a level that makes that knowledge actionable. And what I've seen very often is that we create a whole range of very useful reports that just end up stuck in the cloud, in a sense, or in maybe an office of one or two bureaucrats and whoever researched and developed those reports, but that don't actually end up leveraging tangible policy transformations. And so all this work ends up a little bit misused or used or isn't used, in a sense. And so what I think is important is to make sure that knowledge hubs engage at a significantly high enough political level, and are able to engage transformation at the policy sphere, so that they actually end up being useful. And I think some knowledge hubs have, of course, been successful at doing that, but it's not always the case. And I think it's important to reiterate that from our side, I think, so that really the knowledge gets activated and used, and helps transform everybody's lives. So that's all from my side.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Martin. And you reiterate basically the power relations and the sort of the participation in the knowledge creation and so on as a means of ensuring that the knowledge is relevant, and that reiterates part of the messages which Chloe and others were saying in the first part of the panel. So that's very good, and connection with policymakers. And in this regard, maybe I can do 10-second blurb and saying that Switch Asia is trying, for example, to deal with parliamentarians in Central Asia on the circular economy to kind of bridge this gap on where you have all this technical knowledge, but what if you're a member of parliament? What can you do with this? So really appreciate it. I would like to go back to Tim, because you in your early answer you already referred a little bit to this circular economy forum, World Circular Economy Forum, the regional ones which are there. So can you elaborate a bit on how this is how these forums operate, and what mechanisms or challenges are there to engage with the actual knowledge users through this kind of forums?
Well, through the World Circular Economy Forum, I think it's one concrete thing that has been made here is for instance, with the regional circular economy alliances that have been formed or at least announced at the World Circular Economy Forums. And I can see a lot of bright minds coming together at the forum and getting ideas. And we see a lot of these circular economy regional alliances that have actually taken shape during the forum. I think the, don't quote me on this, but I think the African Circular Economy Alliance, and if I'm not mistaken, the Latin American one, and I know also GACERA, the Global Alliance for Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency. So I think a lot of these things is as simple as bringing a lot of influential people with also good ideas that can make this happen. So I think this is quite concrete thing that we see, this build up that people they want to present something also at the forum, because it's a yearly event where you have a lot of visibility and there's almost a bit of pressure if you come there to provide something that you can announce. So I think this is quite helpful. But I also wanted to comment quickly on this kind of previous area with the roadmaps on the kind of operationalization, because I was hearing this other panel on the kind of the policy gap. And before I commented on, of course, we need to think about the context and the process and really having this solid background. And as you mentioned, Renee, roadmaps can mean really different things to different people. And often it's just words on paper, unfortunately, with a lot of roadmaps that have good ambition and visions, but there's not so much to really make sure that this knowledge and the policy design behind it translates into real action. So I think one medium ambition example is from Finland, where the roadmap process basically materialized in the form of 3 resource targets that were set in 2021. So drawing on all this knowledge that was done during the roadmap, so having co-created this vision and having stakeholders that started to work and figure out what circular economy means for them with research institutes, procurement specialists, and statistics people. So having all of that, we could, for instance, then with the research institutes, we could develop targets that are actually achievable. And then the idea was that if you set too ambitious targets, they might change in the next election, or it could be so that you can't actually make sure that you deliver these targets. So what Finland did then with the strategic program was to have businesses and other stakeholders submit voluntary commitments to reach these targets. And these targets were also linked to the climate and biodiversity targets. So in 2035, so it's strongly linked. And I think this has made it possible that you have made sector-specific scenarios for how you can reach these targets in the best way. And we're seeing that close to 100 companies in Finland have set voluntary or worked with this idea. It's called the Green Deal to set specific targets. And so it's one way to kind of get moving if you don't have enough if you can't just enforce command and control measures, we're going to reach these targets and you have to reach it by this year, that it's something that we can see that is going forward. And this guidance also for the roadmap process is on our website, that you can see how the roadmap process was carried out. Because we see that it's quite many countries. I think it's something like 50 to in 50 countries that you have this, and it's like 75 different documents or something like that. It's quite impressive.
Yes. So thank you very much. That's really good, and I think you highlight also that we need to look at new policy instruments. It's not only new business practices, but new policy instruments and the sort of voluntary initiatives and commitments. We need new ways to jazz together on circularity transformation. So with that, I would like to go to my third point, and I see that time is ticking away quickly. So I wanted to discuss maybe a little bit the issue of how do we acquire the knowledge and curate this and put this into the knowledge platforms? Because one way is to say, okay, we disseminate, but how do we actually extract and curate this knowledge? And maybe I can go back to Philippe for you to come back and speak on that a little bit, on how you see that with the circularity protocol happening, that some of the experiences from some countries are actually curated and being promoted as best practices forward to really reach a scale and impact, which we can see at the world level beyond just one business or one value chain.
Thank you, Renee, and actually, when I was invited to speak in this panel, I thought, oh, this is perfect timing, because we are moving from phase phase 1 now, where we aim to publish the version 1.0 this year, and then we're moving next year into sort of the implementation, and this links perfectly into how can we then leverage the knowledge hubs. But I would say, Renee, maybe as a provocative answer and question, actually the circular economy is extremely complex, right? So for different contexts and especially also value chains, we may need specific gears. So it could be that for value chain X, we may need specific knowledge and a specific catered knowledge hub on fashion, for example, on built environment, etc. That will need even specific methodologies. So I would even welcome that specific level of granularity. I just wanted maybe to go back to one point that the previous two speakers were mentioning. So of course we have the policy pull factor, and that in Europe, especially Tim, you're mentioning, that is pushing companies and countries to move towards circularity and putting specific targets. But I also wanted to emphasize, Martin, to your point on not forgetting civil society. That's extremely important that we involve civil society into these discussions. And I think that's something that in general knowledge hubs tend to forget. So that's maybe something, Renee, that we can also make sure that knowledge hubs bring that civil society knowledge. And then finally, I say the protocol, basically that linkage, and the missing link is really the corporate accountability, so that we move away, as Martin was saying, from the tons of reports and roadmaps that get filed and are just collecting dust in bookshelves, but actually move from that into action and really ensure that there is sort of that corporate performance and accountability system. And I would say, Renee, that's exactly where I see knowledge hubs like Switch Age and Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, really, as I believe Hannes always likes to call it, sort of the knowledge brokers. You can really help us make sure that what we are creating here then makes the perfect link into the implementation, both at country level, but also at value chain and corporate level.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Philip. And I think one point I wanted to bring, and then bring Thomas in on that, because you're basically saying that it's very complex circular economy, and that is also a bit of a challenge. Is that it's, of course, it's very different whether you try in the electronic sector or in textile sector or in hospitality. And that's it's more and more complicated, and that gets us disengaged from basically motivating people. So we need to also maybe focus on what's the core idea and get people hooked in on that. So maybe can I ask Thomas on how this was done with the ASEAN Circular Economy Business Alliance, on how we get people to sort of build into the magnetic north on what this circular economy is about. So Thomas, please.
Thanks, Renee. I think the role of the knowledge hubs should be to inspire and motivate companies to take up circular economy. And the fact remains that today the number of companies doing circular economy is still small. If it is small, that means the majority are inactive. Why are they inactive? I think one reason could be there is uncertainty. They're not sure what is circular economy all about. The markets are not matured enough to accept and take circular products, circular services. That could be another reason. Then also there is these evolving and divergent policies and legislations. Like here in Southeast Asia, we say same but different. They are all legislations, all talk about circularity, but yet they are different. So what had been our approach? Our approach is to go and uncover, document, facilitate, showcase good examples and innovative solutions. And that, in the way you frame that, it is to facilitate learning and sharing. And then we also promote, working on promoting operational tools and metrics, which is appropriate to Southeast Asia, ASEAN, relevant to what the ASEAN member states are looking for in their frameworks and other, and also specific to leading and emerging business sectors. So we also took an ASEAN-centric approach, which actually supports economic integration through promotion, harmonization, and of circular economy approaches. So while we acknowledge there is diversity, we still want to maximize the national sectorial business opportunities to cater. So we had also adopted a very principle-based approach rather than going for definitions because of the diversity. So we have 5 guiding principles of circular. The first one is the purpose is to create net benefits for climate, nature, and the environment. The scope of the circular economy must talk about resource circularity, resource efficiency, and resource substitution. The rationale is responsible business conduct, where businesses are responsible for their impact on society and people. And finally, also, the means is through idealization, co-creation, and finally, there must be a development, contribution, net benefit. So that's how I think we're playing the role.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Thomas, and really this principles-based approach as one way of trying to incite businesses to move forward to on the circularity agenda as the magnetic north, so to speak. Martin, can I get back to you and maybe also ask you what you see on how this knowledge curation is, and you as a Circular Economy Foundation are also very keen on that, on knowledge contribution. So how do you see that the knowledge curation could take better shape?
Yes, thanks for following back on us. Well, there's definitely a need to better inform citizens, companies, and policymakers on what circularity is and could be in a broad way, in a holistic sense, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it is. There's a lot of like limiting circularity to recycling or to some form of resource efficiency, and forgetting often about actual environmental impacts this could have, which is not always clear, and substantiating circular solutions with actual evidence and knowledge about what their potential social and ecological impacts would be. So I think very often we run very quickly with the circular flag going, oh, circularity for circularity's sake, before actually questioning, okay, well, what do we actually want to get there? And what do we actually want to do with this, in a sense? And so this, of course, needs education. It needs training. It needs capacity building so that people understand the different set of circular indicators that they can build, so that people understand the different ways that circular solutions might be implemented in a more sustainable and actually socially just manner. And yes, without that, it might end up just being kind of yeah, poorly done. And so of course these knowledge hubs have a huge influence on that. And not only for policymakers, but across the field. And I think there's so much misunderstanding even for citizens that it's kind of still a new term for a lot of people. And to get people, civil society on board, and to get the voices of the most vulnerable and perhaps also the most concerned by the transition, you really do have to engage with how they would like to see the transition in the first place. I think right now there's a lot of times that the transition has just kind of been decided in some rooms by some actors, often the usual suspects, without actually asking people what do they actually want with this? What kind of circular future would they actually prefer? And very often when we see surveys about what citizens would like for the ecological transition more generally, we see that they are much more interested in a socially fair, a little bit more grassroots, less high tech, more low tech, and more kind of sufficiency oriented or degrowth oriented approach to circularity, one that is not so blatantly focused on high tech innovations that have dubious impacts when it comes to environmental improvements and even to social improvements. So I think it's really, but yet these decisions, it's kind of like a singular technocentric approach to circularity is nonetheless being chosen without actually allowing so many people that are going to be impacted by such decisions to actually have a voice on what they would like and how they would like this transition to focus and how that would impact them actually. So I think this brings a big blind side to how we decide what has been done. And I think it kind of forces us to open a little bit our discussions to the actors that will actually be most impacted, especially those in the global south, to see how we can make a transition that is actually socially fair and environmentally sustainable.
Thank you, Martin. And I think you highlight also the issue on, well, let's also be critical about not just adding a circular band-aid to an economy which is maybe not completely right and not bringing us to the right solution. And that's maybe also something which the global south is leading, like Thailand with sufficiency economy, and Bhutan often suggested as the gross happiness index rather than a gross domestic product. So some of these things would maybe have to play a more important role in circular economy thinking, and that is certainly is one thing. Before we be completely kicked out, I want to ask Andres for maybe a final thought on this, on how can we make sure that we create the right knowledge for circular economy. Andres, can you maybe 1 minute or so sum up your thoughts?
Sure. Thank you. Very brief. Let's say that we're an actor that we don't take any part. We're just basically a neutral actor, just basically facilitating actions into the territories. So in a way, first, we got to understand what the concept of goals is. And I'm talking about companies' goals. We have a phrase that is called goals beyond goals. Usually all companies that are involved within these circular economy scenarios, they want more. They're not only just aiming to focus on the, let's say, the mandatory regulations and so on. So once we have done that, we're able to anticipate what the future is going to be in terms of how do we transfer anything practical or from the desk to the territories. And let me bring you a very short example. All these eco-design rules, methodologies, projects, despite the facts that are just being worked at the moment, in the end, when we want to take this to the place with our recycling society or recycling groups, unless they are initially trained to perform this kind of impact over these kind of eco-design models, nothing will be accomplished unless we have some kind of preparation for that. And we have done that. So in a way, we are producing knowledge through all the initiatives that we run, and that is bringing us some kind of advantage in the process. But again, it's just a matter of anticipation prior to any kind of evolved methodology.
Okay, thank you, Andres. And indeed, I think time necessitates us to cut the conversation here, which is very interesting. So Andres, Philippe, Thomas, Tim, and Martin, I think I got it in the right sequence. Thank you very much for this these inputs. I think if I may, and I just want to highlight also, Kauta came in with comments on if we talk stakeholders, let's not forget the MSMEs, because that's a really important part of the equation. And Philippe also puts up thumbs up. So I think that's really, as we talk business, but we need to make sure that we're inclusive in terms of the smaller businesses, which are also integrated in large business supply chains. So that's very important. But maybe as because we come to close, I think in the first panel on the policy, we discussed basically two elements on policy making. I think first one is that we need the circular economy knowledge. So there's knowledge specific to the context is there. And the second point, which was highlighted, is a bit on the policy making processes. And there is due process to engage your stakeholders, do the visioning. And that's also the roadmap process that you, Tim, were referring to. So doing this process orientation, which is maybe not necessarily specific to circular economy. So we have a good policy making would benefit from circular economy, and circular economy policy would benefit that way. So we need to see both of those elements. I think in the second panel, we had quite some discussion going back and forth. I think the example of looking at actual practices, business practice and examples, and to bring this then up to the level of standards and methods, which the circularity protocol is trying to do in terms of metrics. Anders, you were referring to that as recycling standards and best practices. So I think that's good. And also the kind of focusing again on what's the main idea for circular economy. So that's quite good. I think overall, of course, it's still the challenge that we have, and it was also addressed in some of the questions which came earlier, and we don't all fully agree on what the circular economy is about, isn't it? And that is still sort of on the background beyond this, and that gives me an opportunity to link back to this TA technical advisory, which this webinar is part of, between GGKP and Switch Asia, which is looking at knowledge structuring for circular economy. And we have had a separate work stream, which we did not focus on, to kind of look at the taxonomy. So how can we make sure that terms are more or less understood similarly by different organizations, so that we can also exchange information more and more meaningfully? But that's maybe something which will, I would say, watch this space. Maybe we'll come out with some events on that later in this year. But with that, I wrap up, and I give back to Sarah and Zinaida for wrapping us up. And apologies for holding you longer than planned, but I hope the conversation was interesting. So back to team in Bangkok, Switch team.
Thank you so much, René. Yes, indeed. Congratulations to all the speakers that have brought so much knowledge and expertise and experience into this session. Zinaida, back to you from a really last goodbye to all our 90 plus participants who are with us still today.
Yeah, and colleagues, today's session, being an audience, was truly captivating. In a way, or at least for me, it was a session of therapy and session of providing very thoughtful advice to each other, a space where you have been openly and thoughtfully reflecting on deficiency of concepts, imperfections of the world, our own deficiency of our work, challenges, and also areas for improvement. This kind of self-awareness and willingness to adapt is exactly what makes the knowledge hubs, you as experts, so valuable and impactful, and really, in the current world, extremely therapeutic. And from the side of Switch Asia, we see a number of points where we can connect and be connected as we are working with countries on topics that have been raised, starting with SMEs and APR and circular economy, capacity development, on processes through which businesses are engaged or politicians are consulted with reference to the parliamentarians in Central Asia, and where we grow together with them. And this is the point which is very important for us. We are really looking and learning from you on how to be co-creators rather than producers of good-looking reports. So that's really where we are. And this is a practice which would require very different construction of the process of engagement, would there be government or business or civil society organizations. So I would really like to sincerely thank our panelists for the both set of very deep discussion, for a conversation that connect broad vision with practical enabling mechanism, and also connecting your work with the hubs to broader processes, including ASEAN Plus 3 leadership program, which is dear to our heart, which Switch Asia is also supporting, with policy boot camps and also key initiatives. So those linkages, we feel, strengthen the impact of knowledge hubs or knowledge platform, ensuring that the expertise generated reaches and influences the real world decision making at whichever level. So together with GGKP, we are currently conducting internal consultation with knowledge hubs, while also conducting the dialogue series with more events upcoming. And we certainly look forward to keeping this conversation going, especially in the background of the big political conversations and trends which are unfolding now, and which clearly indicate potential breakdowns in the existing relations in the regions, and where we hope the attention or strong drive to economic might be really enveloped in the thoughts which we all are sharing on circular economy and development, which really benefits not only the small portions of the societies wherever they are, or regionally, nationally, or globally, but also everybody. A big thank you to everyone for your time and insights and engagement today. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, colleagues.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.